And several of my male friends were members of the Cub Scouts, and they invited me to join, which I did. And I was the only black scout anywhere in the area. And we had a parade, and white people lined the sidewalks while we were marching down the street. Everything was fine. People are waving and cheering and smiling until we reached a certain point in this parade route when I began getting hit with bottles and soda pop cans and debris from the street.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of The Hopeful Majority. Today, I have on a very special guest, Dr. Daryl Davis. Now, an NPR article describes Dr. Davis as the man who convinced 200 Ku Klux Klan members to give up their robes. Yes, you heard that correctly. Now, if you're a listener of The Hopeful Majority, you know that we're about helping young people, college students across the country have better conversations, be able to understand and listen to each other, be able to recognize that we need more nuance, we need more listening. And as you know, I started my journey in 2017 as a college freshman doing this work, and Dr. Davis's work has come across my line a lot. And I've been fascinated and especially interested to hear him because every time I'm on a college campus, I get asked a fundamental question, which is, how do you have conversations with people that question your identity? Now, instead of me rambling about it, I thought, let me bring on a race relations expert, someone that has done this work for decades, someone that has a lot of experience, someone that's also an international recording musician and artist. Dr. Davis actually discussed this, and Dr. Daryl Davis has a new book out called The Klan Whisper, a book that I think will be fascinating to read, especially after this conversation. Dr. Davis, welcome to the Hopeful Majority, sir.
Thank you very much, and please feel free to call me Daryl.
Thank you, because if you didn't say that, I would have kept making sure that I called you Dr. Davis, because that's what my Indian upbringing requires me to do. So thank you, sir, for being here. I have to start off with a what might be a basic question, but I don't think is a basic question. It's on everyone's minds, and then we'll get into really your work and your life's work, which is the question that I prefaced in the introduction. Students keep asking me, Manu, I think it's great to have civic dialogue. I think it's great to have conversations. I think it's really important to listen to people. But at this incredibly polarized time, how can I have conversations with people that deny my existence? How do you respond to that?
Well, it requires a lot of patience, a lot of knowing who you are, and not allowing yourself to become triggered by somebody else's stupidity or ignorance. Most importantly, know who you are. Nobody can define you but yourself.
As an African American race relations expert who's grown up and done this work across many decades, um, where did you actually come up with this notion that I'm going to sit across from members of the Ku Klux Klan and have these conversations? How did you think about that?
Okay, well, I just turned 67 years of age last week, but we have to go back to my childhood
Yes.
and understand how I grew up. And because that is very impactful upon who I've become today and the work that I do today. We don't realize growing up that everything we do as a child is a stepping stone to what we do later on as an adult. My parents were in the U.S. Foreign Service, State Department, so I grew up as an American embassy child,
Okay.
traveling all around the world at the age of 3. I did kindergarten, first grade, third grade, fifth grade, seventh grade, all in different schools in different countries. And my classmates in each one of these schools, and I was introduced to school while I was overseas. The in between grades, I'd come back home and do them here because you're assigned to a country for 2 years, and then you return back to the States for a few months, or maybe a year, and then get reassigned to another country. So my first introduction to school was abroad. And my classmates were from all over the world. We're talking the 1960s. This little girl here might be from Japan, that kid from Nigeria, this kid from Russia, wherever. Anybody who had an embassy where we were stationed, all of their children went to the same school. So that was my norm. If you were to open the door back then to my classroom and stick your head in and look, you would say, oh my goodness, this looks like a United Nations of little children. because that's exactly what it was. But to me, it was the norm. For back here in my own country, it was not the norm. All right. Every time I'd come home, I would either be in all black schools or black and white schools, meaning the still segregated or the newly integrated. And there was not the amount of diversity in my classrooms here that I had overseas. So literally, I was living overseas about 10 years ahead of my time into the future because that multicultural environment had yet to come to this country. So I didn't understand all this separation kind of stuff. So now, fast forward, because my norm was being around anybody and everybody. We all, there was no racism. That word was not even used. So one time when I came back, I was age 10, 1968, in the fourth grade, and I was one of two black children in the entire school. Myself in fourth grade, a little black girl in second grade. So consequently, all of my friends were fourth and fifth graders, who all were white. And several of my male friends were members of the Cub Scouts, and they invited me to join, which I did. And I was the only black scout anywhere in the area. And we had a parade, and white people lined the sidewalks while we're marching down the street. Everything was fine. People are waving and cheering and smiling until we reached a certain point in this parade route when I began getting hit with bottles and soda pop cans and debris from the street.
And where was this,
This is
Daryl?
in Massachusetts,
Okay.
and I turned to see, why am I getting hit? What's happening? And I see a group of maybe 4 or 5 people mixed in with the larger crowd. I remember it being 2 kids, maybe a year or two older than me, and a couple of adults throwing things. And I did not know these people. My first thought was, oh, these people over here, they don't like the scouts. That's how naive I was.
Right.
I did not realize that I was the only scout getting hit until my scout leaders came running and covered me with their own bodies and quickly, moved me out of the danger, escorted me out of the danger. And when I would ask them, what happened? I didn't do anything. Why are they doing this? All they would do is kind of shush me and rush me along, tell me to keep moving, everything will be okay. They never answered my question. At the end of the march, I went home. My parents, who were not present for the parade, were cleaning me up and putting band-aids on me and asking me, how did I fall down and get all scraped up? And I told them I didn't fall down. I explained to them what had happened. For the first time in my life, Manu, my mother and father sat me down and explained to me what racism was. And as I pointed out, I never even heard the word racism before. Uh, that word and that behavior did not exist in my world. And so when they were telling me this, my 10-year-old brain could not process what they were saying. The idea that because of my skin color, somebody who didn't even know me, never spoke to me, never saw me before, would want to hurt me. It made no sense to me what they were telling me. So therefore, it had to be false. Why are my parents telling me this lie? I did not believe my parents. And I'd never even heard the word racism before. So again, I point out, this was 1968.
Mm-hmm.
And on April 4th, just a short time after, Martin Luther King was assassinated.
Right.
And I remember it very clearly. Every major city in this country burned to the ground with violence and destruction, all in the name of this new word I had learned called racism. So now I realize my parents had told me the truth, but I did not understand why. Why are people racist? And I formed a question in my mind at the age of 10, which was, how can you hate me when you don't even know me? And that is the question that I've been looking for the answer to now for 57 years, because I was 10 years old then.
Let's just pause. Let's just pause. I just want to emphasize this question because I'd written this down when I was rereading your story, which is, how can you hate me when you don't even know me? Uh, why did you at that time, and I know it's 10 years old, so it's difficult maybe perhaps to answer, but how did you meet that moment with curiosity instead of contempt? Because there's a certain curiosity there, right? And we live at this time where people don't meet violence and problems and challenges and systemic issues with curiosity. So why did you meet that moment with curiosity?
That's an excellent question, okay? And I have the answer for it. That's why it's so important to understand my background and perhaps emulate or simulate, that those type of environments when you have children of your own or other situations, that you can navigate or assimilate. All right. Let's say, let's say that I had not had that travel experience. I'd grown up here in my own country, my entire life. Let's say my first encounter with white people was having rocks and bottles and soda pop cans thrown at me. Maybe I would not be doing this work today. Maybe I would be staying as far away from people who look like that. Whether they are racist or not, I'm going to judge them on the color of their skin based upon the experience I've had. I don't know if I can trust that white person or not because the last white person I saw, threw something at me.
Hmm.
That might have been my attitude had I had a different experience. That's why it's so important to understand my background. I grew up around white people, brown people, yellow people, you name it. I was around them. Every religion, every color, every ethnicity, every culture. Okay. I was an international kid. I was an American kid going to an international school. I was in an international environment. So, and that was my first introduction to multiculturalism.
Hmm.
So, and I got along with everybody. So that's very important. Um, so I think that's why I had more curiosity than contempt
Right.
because as I pointed out to my parents, when they were telling me this, and I kept saying, no, it can't be that. And I pointed out exactly what you're saying. I pointed out because the people who threw the things at me over here on the sidewalk did not look any different to me than my friends in the Scouts or my friends at school or my fellow Americans overseas or my little French or Danish or Australian or German or
Yeah.
Lithuanian friends. So color had nothing to do with it. My parents were wrong.
So you formulated that question and then what?
Well, when I realized that this thing did exist, I could not understand why color was such a factor. And so that prompted the question: how can you hate me when you don't even know me? You're hating me based on the color of my skin, right? So I bought books starting as a teenager, maybe even younger. And today I still buy books. I have a vast library on black supremacy, white supremacy, the Ku Klux Klan, anti Semitism, racism, the Nazis in Germany, the neo Nazis over here, trying to get the answer to that question. Uh, all my books talk about it, but they don't answer the question. And when I would ask people as a kid or teenager, why are people like that? The answer I would get, oh, Daryl, some people are just like that. They're just like that. That's just how they are. That is not an answer satisfactory to placating my curiosity.
Mhm.
All right, so now, who better to ask that question of than someone who would go so far as to join an organization, become a member of an organization that has over 100-year history of practicing hating people who don't look like them, who don't believe as they believe. So that's what prompted me to ask the Ku Klux Klan, because certainly they would have an answer. After all, they formed an organization based upon hate. So why not?
Right, right, right. Of all you said you picked a question, then you said, "Let me take this to the advanced placement level. Let me go
Exactly.
as hard as it gets." So and so let me then just fundamentally ask you this. Um, there's a big leap from asking that question, thinking through that question, reading about it, meeting that moment with curiosity, and essentially holding that curiosity over the next decade or so to then saying, I'm going to go to the heart of this matter. Why do that? And specifically, once you jump into that, how do you know that it's actually going to go well?
You don't. You don't. I mean, all you do your research, you learn the history. It's a dangerous, tragic history. There's a lot of violence, a lot of death, a lot of craziness
Yeah.
going on there. So you don't know, but you try to learn as much as you can. It's like if you're going to want to write a book, or you're curious about the game of football,
Hmm.
why do these people go play football and run after each other and tackle them and slam them down to the ground and all this stuff? Well, you're not going to go ask somebody who plays ping pong. You have to go ask a football player. You have to go to it. Now, granted, perhaps interviewing a football player might not be as dangerous as interviewing somebody who hates you just to look at you.
Yes.
But my curiosity is what drove me. Not courage, but curiosity. Because what I was curious about was this: these people look just like some of my friends.
Hmm.
And my friends do not behave that way. My friends love me, right? Why are these people judging me on the color of my skin? And these people who look like those people are not.
Hmm.
So that was my driving, curiosity.
Right. So that my next couple of questions might sound really dumb, but I can imagine the listener
There are
sitting
no
there
dumb questions.
and saying, "Well, how did this actually start? How did this go about?" And then I have a few other questions about how do you actually have those conversations. And a lot of the people of the show think a lot about these dialogues and conversations, so we won't be starting from basics. But I have to ask you initially, how did you go about finding a member of the KKK? Was it a off chance interaction? Did you actually go and seek them out? And then how did you go about actually facilitating conversation with a member?
Okay. Well, they're not hard to find. My first interaction with a Klansman, I wasn't seeking him out. I happened to come upon him, and I beat the daylights out of him. He was beating up a woman on a sidewalk. I did not know him. I was parking in a parking lot, and I saw a man straddled across a woman on the sidewalk, banging her head into the sidewalk and hitting her in the face.
Oh. And where was this and what time was this, Daryl? Like, what
This was
year?
this was in Maryland back in the 1980s,
Wow, okay.
and it was probably somewhere like around 1:30 in the morning. There
Right.
was an all night restaurant
So this
that I
was in
was.
your 20s?
Yes,
Okay.
yeah, and I was going to go get something to eat after a gig, and I came upon this. So I intervened. I did not know the guy was in the Klan, but it didn't matter to me, even if I had known. I did not like what I was seeing, and I was going to put a stop to it, and that's exactly what I did. And the guy went to jail that night. But that's a whole different story. But the to answer your question about as far as uh, a positive interaction or gleaning knowledge, I was playing in a band. In fact, in the same town where I first had the encounter with the guy that was beating up this woman. Um, I was playing in a band in an establishment called the Silver Dollar Lounge in a town called Frederick, Maryland.
Mhm.
Silver Dollar Lounge back then was not welcoming to black people.
Right.
Black people stayed out of there. There were no signs saying no blacks allowed, nothing like that. You could go in there, but you were not welcome.
There was a cultural of
Ex-
suppression. Right.
exactly. And when you go somewhere where you're not welcome and alcohol is being served, sometimes people have a little too much and they get a little, they lose their inhibitions, and fights break out and things like that. So I was in this place with this all white band. They'd played there before, and now they had a gig, and now I'm a member of the band, so I'm there. I knew about it before I'd ever gone there. I knew about it long before I even joined that band. But it was my first time in there. And on the break, somebody came up to me and put their arm around my shoulder from behind. I didn't know anybody in there other than the band. And so I'm turning around thinking, uh oh, I better get ready here. And this guy had this white guy. He was a lot older than me. He had this big smile on his face and was very appreciative of our music, shook my hand. And then he made a statement I'll never forget. He said this was the first time he had ever heard a black man play piano like Jerry Lee Lewis, the great rock and roll pianist from the 1950s who just passed away a few years ago. And I was not offended by his statement, but I was shocked that given him being so much older than me, that he did not know the black origin of Jerry Lee Lewis's piano style, which Jerry Lee got from black people, black blues and boogie woogie piano players. So I proceeded to tell him that, and that I had gotten that same style from the same people. Well, he was incredulous. He did not believe me. He did not believe that Jerry Lee had learned anything from black people. I assured him that he did. I assured him that Jerry Lee Lewis was a very good friend of mine and had told me himself. He didn't believe that either. But he was so fascinated with me. He wanted me to come to his table and let him buy me a drink. Now, I don't drink alcohol. I never did. But I went back to his table. I let him buy me a cranberry juice. And he paid the waitress, and he took his glass, and he clinked my glass and cheered me. And then he made another statement, which dumbfounded me. He said, this is the first time I ever sat down and had a drink with a black man. And I was dumbfounded. I was mystified. Like, how can this be? Because at that point in my life, I had sat down with thousands, tens of thousands of white people or anybody else and had a beverage, a meal, a conversation. How is it that this guy, maybe 15, 20 years older than me, had never sat down with a black guy before? So innocently, I wasn't trying to be facetious. I said, why? And he didn't answer me. He looked down at the tabletop, just quiet. And I said, why? Again. And his friend sitting next to him, elbowed him and said, tell him. And I said, tell me. Because now my curiosity is just...
Right. Now you're like, I got to know.
I got to know right now. So he looks at me and he says, I'm a member of the Ku Klux Klan. I started laughing, genuinely laughing. It wasn't nervous laughter. It was like fun. This guy's a joke. He's a comedian.
You're just like, what the hell?
What the hell? This guy's being a comedian. And I'm trying to justify why he's saying that in my head. So I'm thinking to myself, okay, he thinks I'm jerking him around about Jerry Lee Lewis learning things from black people and me knowing Jerry Lee. So he's going to jerk me around about being in the Klan or something. So while I'm laughing at his joke, he goes in his pocket, pulls out his wallet, ripples through it, and hands me his Klan membership card. I recognize the Klan emblem, on the card, and I stopped laughing. This card was for real. And now I'm questioning myself in my mind, like, what the heck am I doing sitting at a table with a Klansman, right? And, I recall in my mind, I recall the experience I had beating up the guy. Because the guy that I beat up, like I said, I didn't know he was a Klansman. Like I said, it didn't matter to me, right, who he was or what he was.
Right.
I helped the lady out after I got him off of her, and I put some ice on her head and all that kind of stuff. And she's the one who told me he was in the Klan. He was also a member of the fire department.
Wow.
He was a fireman. So anyway, I got all that going through my head. But this guy did not fit the personality of the other Klansmen. So that's why it's important not to paint anybody with a broad brush. All right. I'm not saying I approve of the Ku Klux Klan by any means. All right. Even though this guy was very nice to me, bought me a drink, wanted to talk to me, liked my piano playing, whatever. That does not mean that I approve of his ideology. All right. But he was very friendly, very forthcoming. We talked about various things, music and the Klan and whatever else. And so he gave me his number and wanted me to call him whenever I was to return. I would call him every 6 weeks when the band had a gig there. He'd bring Klansmen and Klanswomen. I'd meet some of them. Some of them did not want to meet me, which was fine. They'd leave the table when they saw me coming on the break, and others would hang and talk to me. So, everybody's different. And they danced to our music. And then at the end of that year, I didn't realize what was happening. He was just a guy in the Klan. All right. And a few, at the end of that year, I quit that band and I went back to playing rock and roll and different genres of music. And I'd forgotten about him. I had no interest in going to Frederick to hang out with the Ku Klux Klan, on my day off or something. But then it dawned.
That makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. But now it doesn't make sense.
That's the one part of the story that I think makes sense to most listeners until now.
Until now, right? But
Yeah.
see, hopefully this will make more sense. So a few years later, it dawned on me, Daryl, you blew it. The answer to your question
Mm.
that has been plaguing you since the age of 10, how can you hate me when you don't even know me? It fell right into your lap, and you didn't even realize it. The Klansman would have the answer to that question. You need to get a hold of that guy, get back in contact with him, get him to fix you up with the Klan leader for Maryland. Interview that guy, go up north, interview other Klan members and leaders, go down south, go to the Midwest, go to the West,
Mm.
interview these people, and write a book. Because every book that I had was written by white authors, except for two. These two black guys detail how each one escaped a lynching in the 1930s and the 1940s, but not from the perspective of sitting down face to face, having in person interviews with their potential lynchers. That's what I want to do. I want to become the first black author to write an in person, face to face book on the Klan by interviewing these people who would potentially lynch me. No, I do not have a death wish. I want to get it right from the horse's mouth.
Right.
How can you hate me when you don't even know me? So that's how that started. And I got back in contact with that guy. He was very reluctant to set me up with the Klan leader. He was fearful for my safety as well as his own. By the time I got back in contact with him, a few years after the idea dawned on me, he was no longer in the Klan.
Mm.
But he still was fearful of bringing a black man to this Klan leader. So I convinced him to give me the Klan leader's address and phone number, and I said I will handle it.
Hmm.
And he reluctantly gave it to me on the condition that I not tell the Klan leader where I got his personal information. So
Right.
that's how that proceeded.
So that then led to a whole series of conversations that you had with members of the KKK. Um,
Yes,
Tell us how you go about having that conversation. There's something that I've read a lot in your work where you talk about people's reality versus people's perception, and that
yes,
you can't challenge people's reality because that fundamentally causes them to raise a wall. If you
yes.
actually want to get through to people, you have to challenge and create an alternate perception. So that's one thing that I've picked up on. But from your standpoint, how do you actually go about those conversations? And what are some skills and takeaways that everyday people can have? Not necessarily because they're going to talk to members of KKK, but maybe they're going to talk to their crazy uncle at Thanksgiving.
Sure. Okay. And these principles and tactics or tools, that I employ are things that I've picked up and I've looked at myself. Like why, okay, first of all, when you see my name in the media, it will say something to the effect of black musician converts X number of white supremacists or KKK or whatever, right? Um, no, that is an incorrect statement.
Mm,
I did not convert anybody, not 200, not two, not even one. I am the impetus for over 200 white supremacists, whether they're Klan members or neo
mm,
Nazis or just the racists next door, to convert themselves. All right.
mm.
Now,
That's a really important frame because it
yes,
means that you didn't go in with the agenda of conversion.
exactly. My agenda was very narrow. All I want to know is I'm not here to be your friend. I'm not here to tell you to get out of the Klan because it's wrong. I'm not here to say, give me your robe. You should not be in this organization. I'm just here to ask you a question. How can you hate me when you don't even know me? Help me understand what is going through your head, and I will thank you for your time, and we will go our separate ways. Because you were raised this way, I was raised this way, and most people that we know were raised this way. We were told when we were kids, a tiger does not change its stripes. A leopard does not change its spots. That's who they are,
Right.
right? So with that,
And people don't change their minds.
exactly. Well, people can change their minds, but um,
That's at least what we're taught.
yes, and so with that, with the tiger and leopard analogy in my head, why would I think that a Klansman or Klanswoman would change their robe and hood. That's who they are,
Mm-hmm.
like the tiger and like the leopard. I was wrong. Yes, a leopard and tiger cannot change their stripes or spots because they are born with those stripes and spots. However, a Klansman or Klanswoman is not born with that robe and hood. That is a learned behavior, a learned ideology. And what can be learned can be unlearned. Now, I did not go in with that attitude because I was of the tiger and leopard mentality, right? I just want an answer to my question, and that's that. But in the course of conversation, we began finding that we had things in common with one another. If you spend 5 minutes with your worst enemy, your biggest adversary, you will find something in common. You start out this far apart on your ideological spectrum, whether it can be about anything, not just race. It could be abortion, nuclear weapons, the war between Gaza and Israel, whatever it is. You're on one side, somebody else is on the other side. You talk to that adversary for 5 minutes, you're going to find something in common, and that gap is going to narrow. Another 5 minutes, you're going to find more in common, and now it's here. When you get here, you are in a relationship with your adversary. You're in a cordial relationship. Maybe you're not going out to dinner with this person or hanging out at his house or whatever, but you're having a cordial relationship. You keep on talking, you found more in common. Now you're here, you're friendly. And that causes a cognitive dissonance in that person's head. And because you have found so much more in common than you have in contrast. And they began wondering, why did they hate you? Because the trivial things that you have in contrast, such as skin color, or whether you go to a church, a synagogue, a mosque, or a temple, begin to matter less and less. And it causes that dissonance that has to be addressed. So they began seeing you in another way. Now, to the other point, what I've learned, when I never expected anybody to give up their robe and hood. That's not what I came there for. But over the course of time, when I saw people changing, and the first person quit the Klan, and I got his robe and hood, yeah, I was shocked. But then it happened again with somebody else, and then it happened again. So then I had to step back and say, what am I doing? What am I doing that's causing this? That's causing people to think differently. And so I assessed a lot of things that I'd learned from childhood that I just gathered naturally because my parents were in the diplomatic corps.
Mm-hmm.
My father's job was to go to a foreign country and meet with their president, their dignitaries, etc., to foster better relations between that foreign government and our U.S. government.
Mm-hmm.
And how is that done? What was he doing? I wasn't studying him. I grew up with him. You know what I mean?
Right,
It was
right.
just always around. And so I looked at those things. People come to our house to cocktail parties. I'd go to their homes, play with their kids while my parents talk to their parents.
Right.
And you pick up on things. I have been between my childhood travels and with my parents, and now my adulthood travels as a professional musician and lecturer. I travel all around the world again. I have performed in all 50 states. When you combine the number of countries I've been to between my childhood and my adulthood, I've now been to 64 countries on 6 continents. I have seen and experienced a wide variety of cultures, colors of skin, ethnicities, belief systems, religions, all of that. And all of that has helped shape who I've become. I want to quote you my very favorite quote of all time.
Okay.
It's by Mark Twain, and it's called the Travel Quote. And Mark Twain said, "Travel is fatal to prejudice, bigotry, and narrow mindedness, and many of our people need it sorely on these accounts. Broad, wholesome, charitable views of men and things cannot be acquired by vegetating in one little corner of the earth all one's lifetime." And that is so true. Now, all that travel that I have under my belt does not make me a better human being than someone with less travel. Most Americans do not travel. That's a fact.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Our US Census Bureau says that less than 50% of Americans even own a passport. which is very sad to me. But
Right.
that does not make me a better person with all that travel. But what it does is it gives me a better and broader perspective on humanity
Yes.
than people who don't have that experience. All they have are presumptions about other people. I have experience. So
Mm.
their opinion does not outweigh my experience. I mean, I'm not saying that to sound egotistical, but it's just, okay, so
That's right. That's right. But you have but I just wanna ask you this one question because I can hear someone saying, "Oh my god, Daryl just outlined what it means to actually unlearn learned behavior through genuine curiosity. Your travel, your lived experience has given you this perspective on humanity." But there's this common critique, Daryl, that at least someone my age, much younger than you, much less experienced than you, has been raised in, which is this idea that if you sit down with somebody that is your fundamental adversary, you're platforming them and you are giving their views credence. How do you respond to that as you continue to outline your story? That you sitting down with a member of the KKK, the critique of that is, well, that's actually just justifying their ideology.
not at all. I've heard that a million times.
I know you have, and
Yep,
I've
people.
heard it only 1,000 times, but that's because I've been doing this a fifth of the time you have.
Well, hopefully you won't hear it too many more times as you grow older. Hopefully, people are becoming more and more aware and more intelligent about it.
Right.
But
So what's your response? Yeah, I'm curious.
okay, well, here's the thing. I came here 400 years ago as a slave. Okay, I'm a descendant of slaves. All right, 1619. All right. Now, I'm just saying in general, I'm a descendant of slaves, whether it was 1619 or 1620 or 17, whatever. All right. Um, when you have been mistreated for 400 years and you're still being mistreated today, you're not considered an equal. It's time for you to change your approach. Because if you keep doing the same thing over and over again, you will get the same result. So I don't consider it platforming people. I believe this, all right? In all my travels, no matter how far I've gone from my own country, be it physically or culturally, the distance, right? Whether it's next door to Canada or Mexico or halfway to the other side of the world. I've been to your native land, India, as well, okay, which is very far from the United States. I've been to Australia, all right, different places, Asia, Europe, Africa. I lived in Africa for 10 years,
Mm.
all right, so I spent a lot of things there. What I've seen many differences, I've seen many similarities, but what I've deduced is this: no matter how far I've gone from my own country, no matter how different the people may be who I encounter, maybe they don't look like I look, they don't speak my language, they don't worship like I worship, or maybe they don't even worship at all. I always conclude one thing: everybody I've met is a human being. And given that fact, every human being wants these five core values in their lives.
Mm.
Everyone in the world wants to be loved. Everyone wants to be respected. Everyone wants to be heard. Everyone wants to be treated fairly and truthfully. And everyone wants the same things for their family as anybody else would want for their family. So if we can learn to apply those five core values or any of those five values when we find ourselves in an adversarial situation or in a culture or society in which we are unfamiliar or uncomfortable, I will guarantee you that your navigation of that situation, that culture, that society will be much more smooth and much more positive. All right. So I these are the things that I saw myself doing that I didn't get them out of a book. I didn't you know, sit down and say, what can I do to make an impact on this person? These are the things that were just happening naturally. I analyzed what was going on in each of these interviews, and I saw what triggered these people. And I've put together these 5 core values. So now, back to the perception and reality. Let's get to that to show you what I mean. I'm not platforming these people. I'm showing them respect. And let me be very clear. I do not respect their ideology. I do not respect that they believe their white skin gives them superiority over me and I'm inferior because I have darker skin. So I don't respect that. But I respect their right to say that. All right. So, yes, I give them a platform to explain to me what they are feeling. How am I going to learn how to address their falsehood, their myths, their whatever, if I don't give them that platform? Because then I'd be as bad as they are. They presume things about me based on the color of my skin, and they don't know me. So if I don't sit back and listen to them and give them the opportunity to have that platform and tell me why I'm inferior or why I'm a criminal or why I'm lazy and my brain is black people are born with a small brain and all the things that I've heard, how am I any different than they are? I'm going to presume that they're this way because of whatever. I'm making a presumption rather than basing my thoughts on fact, on what they're telling me. All right. So I have to hear them out. I don't respect what they're saying. I respect their right to say it. And everybody wants to be respected. So now, here is the perception reality thing. As you pointed out, that you said you've seen in other interviews with me or things like that. Yes, there's a saying that one's perspective or one's perception, same thing, is one's reality. That is very true. Whatever somebody perceives, whatever becomes their perception becomes their reality because that's all they know. It may not be real, but it's real to them.
Mm-hmm.
You may know different because you're older or you had a different experience or whatever. They don't know for whatever reason. They're a kid, they have not experienced that or whatever. All right. So it's real to them. Do not attack their reality because they will push back, they will resist. Because essentially, when you do that, you're telling them that they don't know what they're talking about. You're telling them that that they're lying, that they're stupid, they're not very smart if they think that's real. So rather than attack their reality, all you're going to get is pushback, resistance. If you continue attacking their reality, that pushback is going to escalate. It's going to get loud. It's going to get nasty. You keep on pushing. It may rise to the level of anger. And if you push it at the level of anger, guess what? It's going to rise to the level of violence. You're going to end up in a fight. Most fights start with people yelling at each other.
Mm-hmm.
The yelling comes before the physical boom, right? So don't attack the reality. If you want their reality to change, you cannot change it. What you can do is you can offer them a better perception or better perceptions, plural. If they resonate with one of your perceptions, then they will change their own reality because that perception becomes their reality. An example that I like to give is if you have a younger brother, for example, say 8 or 9 years old, whatever, and he goes to a magic show with his friends, little friends,
Mm-hmm.
and he comes back and tells you, "Manu, you're not going to believe this. This magician on stage, he asked for a female volunteer out of the audience, and 50 women raised their hand, and he picked one out and brought her on stage, and he had her climb into this long box and put her feet out the hole at one end and her head out the hole at the other end, and then he closed the box." And he took a chainsaw and went through the middle of the box. And the chainsaw came out the bottom of the box. He cut her in half. And then he told her to wiggle her feet out the hole. And she wiggled her feet. And you said, listen, it didn't happen.
This is a real story. My brother is 10 years younger than me. So
Okay.
this may or may not have happened in the past.
Okay. So you get my point. So you said, listen, it didn't happen like that. Yes, it did. I was there. You were not there. I saw it with my own eyes. You weren't even there. You have attacked his reality. You're telling him he did not see what he saw. He knows what he saw. He saw a man cut a woman in half, and you were not there. So his attitude is, how dare you tell me I did not see what I saw and you weren't even there, right? He's 100% right. You did not see it. You were not there. So
Right.
you have attacked his reality. All right. So he's going to push back. And then to even prove more to you that he's right and you were wrong, he tells you that after the saw passed through the box and she wiggled her feet out the hole, he took the half of the box with the feet and moved it over here to one side of the stage, took the half with the head and moved it over there to the other side of the stage. And then he walked over to where the woman's head was in that half of the box. And he spoke to her. And she spoke back to him. They had a conversation. And he's telling you all this. And then the man brought the two halves back together. He did some incantation and then he opened the lid of the box and the lady climbed out. He cut her in half. He separated her. He put her back together. No blood. And you say, listen, it's an illusion. No, it's not. I'm telling you. He's going to go off on you some more.
Right.
Okay, because now you know he went through all this explanation to prove to you, and you're still, accusing him of not telling you the truth and you weren't even there. You didn't see it, right?
Right.
So you are not going to change his reality. What you do is he might get into a fight with you. What you do is you offer him a better perception. You say to him, listen, I understand what you're saying. That's pretty fascinating. But let me ask you a question. Do you think that it is possible, just perhaps, that when he picked a lady out of the audience, that maybe the one he picked, maybe she works for him. She knows the trick. And she travels all around the country with him and always sits in that same seat in every theater that they go to. So that way he looks through the audience and he always zooms in on her. He brings her up, and when he has her get in the box, there is a pair of mannequin dummy legs laying on the floor of the box that are wearing the same stockings and high heels that she has on.
Mm.
When she gets in there, she grabs the handles of them, and shoves the ankles and shoes out the hole, right? And then she takes her own legs, knees, and brings her knees up under her chest. So now her whole body is on that half of the box. For ruining it for you. Okay.
Right. By the way, I always wondered how this trick was performed, so thank you making this for both ruining it and changing my perception. So that's how so you're saying you challenge the perception, right? Um, and through that example, which I think is a really illuminating way to demonstrate how you can shift perception. Here's my question. Okay, because I think that most people listening to this are really inspired and fascinated by your story, but are wondering, can I actually be like Daryl? And a question I oftentimes get on college campuses with students is, Manu, it's great that you're talking about this dialogue, but I don't think I can do this. What is your response to people and whether or not you think others are capable of this type of curiosity, especially if they haven't traveled and had the experiences that you've had?
Okay. So nobody has to be like Daryl. I want people to be like themselves. All right. But, we all can agree on different things. We all have different levels of comfort. What we feel comfortable doing, what we don't feel comfortable doing. All right. So, like, let's say, you know, uh, I might want to, you might want to come to DC, or I might want to come to Houston and see you, whatever. Okay, I'm comfortable flying. Maybe you're not comfortable flying, so you might take the train. You
Right.
want to stay on the ground. Some people are afraid to go on cruise ships because they're out on the ocean. Whatever. But we all agree we need to get to this to some place. So how we travel may differ, but we all are going to arrive at that destination, whether it's by boat, plane, or train, or whatever. All right. So nobody has to be like Daryl Davis. But let me say this. My degree is in music. Music is my profession. Improving race relations is my obsession. Right? I did not major in psychology or sociology. I am just a rock and roll piano player. So if I can, do this kind of work and be successful at it, anybody can. So let's pick some other avenues that people can take. They don't have to be just like Daryl Davis. I am on the front line, right there with these people, right on the front line, okay? Um, you don't have to be on the front line unless you're comfortable being on the front line. And don't get on the front line unless you know what you are doing. You can get yourself hurt. All right. So you can, but pick a line. You can be on the back line. You can be on the front line. You can be on the sideline. You can be online. Now, what do I mean by that? Let me make another analogy for you. You can probably name me your favorite movie of all time. And you can tell me how many Oscars or Academy Awards it won. You can tell me who the lead actor or actress was. Maybe you can tell me who the director was, right? But can you tell me who the name of the people who operated the cameras, the name of the people who hung the lights, the name of the person who set up the wardrobes for all the actors and actresses, the names of the people who did all the stunts, the names of the people who did the publicity, made the posters and made the commercials on the radio and the TV to get this movie out into the theaters and all this stuff that caused your favorite movie to win all these Oscars? Probably not.
Hmm.
Okay, so the people that you can name for me, the actor, the lead actress and lead actor, they're on the front line. They're the ones that you see. All right, the director, he's a little bit back from the front line, but he's not back as far as behind the camera. All right. So, but the people behind the camera, they're on the back line. The people, online, they're the ones on the computer publicizing, making, PR, press releases, this, that, and the other. They're online. They're the ones, and then you have people on the sidelines, doing the stunts, doing this, doing that, setting up the wardrobe, etc. Writing the script, making sure everybody has what they need, hanging the lights, running the sound, mixing the sound. Okay, you don't know their names, but
Right.
everybody, at the end of that movie, there's like 5 or 10 minutes worth of credits. You're like,
Mhm.
why are all these names here? Every one of those people contributed to that movie
And they all
being
played a
as
role.
they all played a role, and that's what led. They all played a good role and did their job very well, which is why your favorite movie got 6 Oscars or whatever it got. All right. So everybody is important. I am no more important than somebody on the back line or on the sideline or online. All right. So we all have to work together. Pick a line in which you feel comfortable. Hey, I'm a good writer. Maybe I could publicize some stuff. Okay, we'll get online. All right. I want to document this. I want to film this. Okay, get on the back line behind the camera. All right. Now I want to go talk to these people. Okay, come on with me and get on the front line. Everybody can be on a line: sideline, back line, front line, online. Pick the line that you feel comfortable, and let's all work together and get the job done.
Hmm. I want to be cognizant of your time, so I have sort of one last question on this, which is I'm concerned, Daryl, today that a lot of younger people and people in general, I think, in our country are choosing to not pick any line. They're frankly not going on the movie set. They're running away from the movie set and burying their heads in the sand because people are, I think, just so concerned, so nervous, or people feel very powerless. I mean, I'm sure. In fact, in some ways, I want to have actually a second conversation with you because there's a whole litany of questions I have as a younger person. Curious about burnout. Curious about how do you think about making large change, given that these conversations take so long. So I'm going to hold on a lot of those questions, but where
Let's do a part two for sure.
I would be grateful for that, honestly. Um, but where my mind goes right now, at least in the immediate term, is how do you think about a lot of people just not picking any lines and instead choosing to disengage? And importantly, a lot of people seem critical of dialogue and the practice that you're offering. How do you respond to that and think about that? What is your advice to people?
Stop burying your head in the sand. Everybody's vote counts, unless there's voter fraud. And we saw a lot of people not vote this past election, which is why we have what we have today. Okay. So we all have a responsibility to ourselves, to our society, and to our future. If my parents ran away from the movie set, did not pick a line, I would still be riding in the back of the bus. I would still be drinking from a separate water fountain and going to a separate restroom and being refused service in certain restaurants. So they picked lines to be on so that the future, before I was born, would change. Have I experienced racism? Of course. And I still experience it, but not as much as my parents did, right? And they did not experience it as much as my grandparents did, their parents, because people chose lines. These kids today, they need to get themselves together. They want to be adults. They want to be in charge. They want to be this, that, and the other. Well, you know what? No pain, no gain.
No pain, no gain. That should be the title of like a joint lecture we deliver on like the next college campus. Okay, let me say one more thing. Uh as I hear you and as you've articulated, frankly, your vision for how you've had these conversations, and importantly, the curiosity with which you've approached these dialogues and these conversations, the immediate word that comes to mind for me is courage and a deep sense of gratitude. But you've also outlined this idea that the ideology and the method of engagement that you're positing is not the only one. So it's interesting. When I asked you, how do you respond to people's critique of dialogue and deliberation and conversation? You said that there's a lot of different roles and that you're fulfilling one specific role in a broader set of roles.
Okay,
Um,
so let me give you another example real
yes,
quick.
please.
And by the way, this is my new book right here, The Klan
Yes, the Klan
Whisperer.
Whisperer.
It's available on Amazon, all right? And I detail a lot of the methods and methodology, that I use in here, and anybody can do it. So
And if you're listening to this on Spotify and Apple, we'll link it in the description. But on YouTube, Daryl just held up the book.
okay, so let's say, for example, there is a disturbance at one of your neighbor's houses. Let's say husband and wife are fighting,
Right.
and you live close enough, that you can hear them throwing pots and pans at each other or whatever, right? So you call the cops. Usually, it's going to be two uniformed police officers who arrive, and they're going to knock on the door and talk to the husband. They're going to separate the husband and wife. One goes to the kitchen, one goes to the living room, and they're going to each get their stories and stuff. And they're going to tell them, "Hey, listen, you're disturbing the peace. Y'all need to calm down, because if we have to come back, somebody's going to get arrested and get a fine for disturbing the peace, right?" And they leave. But now we've also heard stories where somebody has gotten disgruntled. Maybe he lost his job at work or something happened, and he comes home and now he's holding his wife and kids hostage. He's threatening to kill them. We've heard too many stories like that as well. And so now, you call the police. It's not just the two uniform officers that arrive. There are a whole different, those two guys arrive, the SWAT team arrives. Um, the two officers are now knocking. They're not knocking on the door. This guy's got a loaded gun. They don't want to risk his, because we hear about guys killing their wives, killing their kids, and then shooting themselves, right? We don't want that to happen, especially with the wife and the kids. So these two uniformed guys stand back. The SWAT team surrounds the house with their telescopes on their guns, looking in the windows. They might even be on the roof, whatever. They got the house surrounded. Uniformed guys are standing back. And then you got another branch of the police who's calling the guy inside the house on the phone. He's known as the hostage negotiator, right? And they all are coordinating with each other. Not one of those divisions, SWAT team, uniform, or hostage negotiator, is more important than the other. If the guy on the phone says, "Hey, everybody else stand down," the guy, he's talking to me. He says he'll let one of his kids out the front door. You go with that guy. He's making contact. And the guy lets a little kid out the door in exchange for food or whatever he wants, right? You let this guy take the lead. If the sniper from the SWAT team says, "Hey, I can take this guy out. I got a clear shot. Nobody else will get hurt," the commander says, "Go for it." Boom, that guy's gone. He's dead.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and they go in and pull the kids and wife out. If the uniform guy are talking through the bullhorn, "Hey, walk out the house with your hands up, blah blah blah," and the guy does it, you go with him. All right. They all are coordinating with each other. They all are specific, different branches of the police department, but they all have a certain line that they're on.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I say.
That's right.
Pick your line, but there are other lines that you must coordinate with.
Yes, democracy is a team sport, and we need everybody. I so deeply appreciate, Daryl, the example that you've set, the methodology that you've outlined, and the story, frankly, that you've had, because I've been doing this work for about 6.5 years, just trying to get people to have conversations and listen and engage. And man, this work is tiring, which is why I just want to say that the example that you've set is much more difficult than anything I've ever done. So I'm truly grateful to you, and I appreciate you taking time to come on the show.
But Manu, thank you for having me. And you know what? You are online because you are helping me promote this work. So you've taken a line. I can't do it all by myself. You're getting it out there on Spotify, YouTube, and whatever other podcasts you're on. So all of these roles are important. We all are working this together.
That's right.
And yes, it may be tiring work, but you know what? When you see somebody give up their swastika flag, get their swastika removed, get rid of their robe and hood, that rejuvenates your fatigue. Trust me.
That's right. That's right. Thank you, Daryl, for taking the time. I so appreciate everybody listening. Maybe we'll do a part two. Like or subscribe if you're listening to this and you want to hear a part two. And more importantly, I appreciate everybody taking the time to listen to these nuanced, productive conversations every Monday. YouTube, Spotify, Apple, wherever you get your content. We have conversations with amazing leaders like Dr. Davis. And please check out Dr. Daryl Davis's book, The Klan Whisperer. We're going to link it in the description. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Daryl, for coming on.
My pleasure. And if you get a chance, check out the Porhuman organizations, porhumanfoundation.org.